but essentially it's the same every time. And so the benefit is that you get familiar with it. The drawback is that you might get too familiar with it and go into autopilot. So I hope that this series of videos helps you kind of question your practice in a good way so that you can go deeper and experience more support in your practice. Let's get to it. I want to start with the breathing exercise, and let's say the first 3 postures of the series. This is known as the warm-up in the sequence. So it will be a breathing exercise, a half moon series, a chair series, and then Garudasana Eagle Pose. So those are the 3 postures plus the breathing exercise. So the breathing exercise, depending on whether it's a 60-minute class or a 90-minute class, is this. 1 set of 10 or 2 sets of 10. It looks like this. That's 1 round. So there's an inhale, there's an exhale. A couple of things to notice. I guess this isn't going to be like teach you how to do it, but the focus of this video being on cleaning it up. So what I often see go wrong in this posture is the stacking of your shoulders and your hips and your heels. Oftentimes when people have tight shoulders, they won't be able to get very far back until they need to start to compensate, and then the hips push forward and those tight shoulders draw back, and then they feel like they're in it because their elbows are touching. But you're not really in it, right? So I always stress in the classes to feel the shoulders stacking over your hips stacking over your heels. Let that be the primary stacking. And then if you can get your elbows to touch on those exhales, that's great. But what are we ask yourself, what are you sacrificing in touching your elbows if the shoulders slide back and you're in this kind of back bend, right? We want to keep the structure and in time get into the stretch. So what can happen at first if you really adhere to the shoulders, hips, heels principle is that it's going to be harder to get your elbows to touch, and that's fine. That would just look like this. I inhale and I exhale. So you'll notice my elbows aren't touching, but there's that stack of shoulders over the hips, over the heels. In time, keeping that structure, you'll be able to squeeze your elbows together and really concentrate the movement in the neck part of the spine, not this part of the back. So I'd say that's the main tip for the breathing exercise. Concentrate more on keeping your shoulders, hips, heels in line, and then in time, get those elbows to touch. If they don't touch for a little bit, this is okay. Work towards it, you'll get a richer stretch that way. The other thing that I've been saying to look for in that posture is to really start to work your straight legs. And a lot of the standing postures, the cue is to lock the legs, which is a questionable phrase, but essentially what you're going to do is work with the straight leg. It's the same idea as what we just said, the shoulders, hips, heels. Now you just take that idea and put it on your leg. Hip, knee, heel. One line rather than a little bend. Now, if you're really tight, the legs are going to want to bend. You work to keep them straight. If you're very flexible though, what I see happen all the time is that the knees start to go back like that and you kind of hyperextend. So, just like you cultivate shoulders over hips over heels, I want you to cultivate hips over knees over heels, okay? This warms you up for the duration and the stamina that you really need to keep your legs straight, right? And what does it feel like, those straight legs? It feels like feet down, knees up, thighs tight. I got on some short shorts today, so I want you to look at the muscle above my knee. So this is me not engaging, and then this is me engaging. The knee tightens up, and then the quads engage and really stay active. And what this does, as long as you don't jam your knee back, what this does, this push down, draw up, lengthens your leg and really intensifies the practice, in my opinion, in a very beneficial way. So, reviewing, in the breathing exercise. You're going to focus on your shoulders, hips, heels stacking, elbows coming together when they're ready, and you're going to focus on your legs staying straight and steady the whole time. All right, that covers the breathing exercise. Now we'll move on to the half moon series. This series essentially looks like this: right, left, backwards, forwards. So it's half moon to the right for a minute, half moon to the left for a minute, a back bend, not so much a minute, and then a forward fold. In the forward fold, you really squeeze your chest to your thighs, drop the face towards the shins. Okay, so that's the idea. We go right, we go left, we go forward, we go back. The entire time, you work with your arms by your ears. So I like to sometimes in the warm-up, rather than just tick-tocking right and left, to take it more into a circle here. So you can really explore the connection of your arms by your ears. And I like to say the fingers now are an extension of the spine. So try and keep this spine lined up rather than letting the head or the arms deviate from the center line. Okay, so what happens when people come into this pose? As soon as they get into the tension, the chin comes forward, the shoulders round back, a hip or a shoulder pokes forward. So working first on the alignment, keeping your hips and your shoulders squared off to the front, keeping your arms and your legs straight. In time, when you get strong enough, you can go deeper and not deviate from the form. But at first, and really as a good rule of thumb, not going as deep on the outside and really checking off all the boxes, getting your alignment. So we do that on both sides. And then the back bend. This is quite, we can really go in two directions here, but to stay with this form, rather than letting the weight of the head drop back, you keep your arms by your ears. So this focuses on a full spinal movement, right? Not just relying on the neck going back. That's the difference of this back bend. And you can see if my arms are supposed to be an extension of the spine, how there's a deviation. There's a little separation happening. You can even hear in the quality of how I'm talking that there's a strain here, okay? So rather than going back like this, keep your arms by your ears, lift your chest up, and start to draw back. So you'll notice I'm not going as deep with the neck, but it's a lot harder. As I push the feet down and lift the chest up, it's more of the spine getting into the back bend, especially around the chest, right? Really opening through the shoulders. And I'm shaking here because the whole body is engaged, not just the neck. And then you come back to the center. And we'll take the forward fold. Again, keep the arms by the ears when you fold forward. This is what I want. This is usually what happens. Okay, so two things: my arms separate from my ears, we don't want that, and the legs jam back like this on the way down. So rather than hinging back at the knees, shift everything forward. And if you have to bend your knees a little, that's fine. What we want to do is work with a long back in this pose. This, rather than straight legs, tightening up my hamstrings, making my back curl, and folding like that, right? We don't want that. We want long spine. So what does that look like? As you fold forward, keep your arms by your ears, maybe a little bend in the knees, keep the spine long, keep your chin off your chest, keep the core active, and then you're down there. And you pedal it out a little bit just to warm it up. That's usually the cue. And then you'll scoop the heels from behind. This is what I see. I think it's hard to do, but I see a lot of people not being able to get their elbows close. You want to think of arms to the legs completely, chest to the thighs. And that's the most important part, right? Is this forward fold from your hip. Drop the weight of the head. And then start to lift your butt up as you pull on the heels. So it's okay if your hamstrings are tight, if your legs aren't straight. Keep your chest on your thighs. I'm keeping my face off my shins so that the mic doesn't get screwed up. But ideally, back of the neck long like this. Okay, you release that, extend out, press to lift yourself back up, and then the arms come down by the sides. All right, so really just working on the alignment rather than the depth. That takes us through the half moon series. And then the chair pose in 3 parts. Part 1, feet hips width, arms up, looks like this. Part 2 looks like this with my feet up like that. Part 3 looks like this. Heels up a little bit, inner knees touch. So those are the 3 parts of the chair sequence. Part 1, really focusing on the butt going back and the chest lifting up. So there's a real C curve here. And oftentimes people will keep the weight forward, but I want you to really bring the weight back into your heels, like you're gonna fall over backwards. And as you sit low, continue to lift your chest up. Often too, what happens is people pull their shoulders forward, but think of keeping your shoulders on your back and reach from your fingers instead of your shoulder, okay? That's the main thing in the first one. People usually get the first part pretty good. Things get tricky when you lose the feet on the ground. So the heels lift up, and now, right, first set your butt was back, your shoulders were forward, and there was a little C curve. Now, with your heels up, it's much more about keeping your shoulders over your hips the whole time. So what happens here, what people do is they'll start to come down and watch how my whole body kind of tilts and is wanting to do that first chair pose. But we're not doing that in this pose. What we're doing instead is making sure the back of your tailbone is long, the front of the hips lift up a little bit, so your pelvis is in a neutral position. I'll even sometimes have students put their hand on their low belly and the other hand on the low back to feel your pelvis and make sure that it's not starting to arch back. So what that looks like is a little bit of this. And again, if you go too low and you start to slide away from the form, slow it down, just don't go so low. In time, you'll get stronger. You'll start to feel what the correct alignment is, and then you'll be able to support a deeper posture, okay? So that's the second part. The third part is the same idea as the second part, where the shoulders and the hips are stacking. So what people do is this, they go down like this. And you think I'm exaggerating, I'm not exaggerating. What we want to look for is shoulders over the hips the whole time. Why? So that the core can engage. If you're pitched forward like this, it's a little bit harder for the core to really have space to grip in the correct way. Also, what people do, they think going down really low is better, right? Oh, I'm super low, look how low I am. But there's no engagement because I'm just kind of dropped here. So what I tell people to do is however low you think you go, lift up an inch off of that. So you're on the high side of it. So that you're back in the activity. It's the difference between this and the relaxing, right? It's active the whole time. So never go too low. And then everybody cheats when they come out. The butt goes back so they don't use their core and they come up like that rather than like this. Okay? So essentially, part 1, just make sure your weight's in your heels. Part 2, really focus on your shoulders over the hips. Part 3, also focus your shoulders over the hips and concentrate on not going too low. Cool. Last one here is the eagle pose, Garudasana. The arms come up and you wrap your right arm under your left first and start to pull the elbows down. I don't have a aesthetically great version of this pose. Usually, you know, the palms touching, but my body is a cage. So they'll sit low, lift the right leg up and over and breathe here. So this is essentially the posture here. When people get really flexible, they can put the foot behind the calf and get a double bind there. But I'll just talk about what I see often going wrong in this posture, is people not sitting low enough in their standing leg. They'll get this hook, but the standing leg's almost straight, and they're keeping the standing leg straight in order to get the foot behind the calf. That's fine to start, but then you gotta sit into it. Like when you sit low, it activates your hip and your glute, and then you could really stretch and integrate the integrity, right? Integrate your strength through the posture. Integrate the integrity doesn't really make sense, but you know what I mean. So sitting low in that standing leg, keeping the butt back and the chest up. And then often what happens here is because it's a bit of balance and it's hard, people will start to hold the breath. But really, you want to keep breathing the entire class. And maybe if you're used to holding the posture and your breath is tight, if then you start to let the breath in, it's going to be a change, so you might wobble a bit. Don't get discouraged. Keep breathing, and in time, then the body will start to recognize this breath as a support system to hold the posture, not recognize holding the breath as that means we need to be perfectly still, right? So there's an ease to it as well. That takes us through the standing series. Just to recap, breathing exercise, keep your shoulders over your hips, keep your legs straight, even if the elbows take a little bit longer to get them to touch. Half moon series, keep your arms by your ears, keep your legs straight, knees up, thighs tight. Back bend, keep the arms by the ears. Forward fold, keep the arms by the ears. Chair pose, sit low, weights into the heels. Chair pose part 2, shoulders over the hips. Chair pose part 3, shoulders over the hips and don't go too low. And then eagle pose, sit lower in that standing leg. Make sure you're breathing. That concludes Davy's little tips and tricks for the warm-up series of the 26 and 2 postures. More to come. Leave feedback. I'll keep this content coming if it's helpful for you. Peace out.